Hello again, Eric here with the Paperback Warrior blog and podcast. This show is an offshoot of the paperbackwarrior.com blog where you can find hundreds and hundreds of vintage fiction reviews across multiple genres. Be sure to follow us every day on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, and X for posts on old books, magazines, pulps, comics, and a look at authors that we may not even talk about here on the show. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel to find over 150 videos. So on today's episode, I'm presenting a feature on Prentice Winchell Jr. Now, you probably don't recognize that name, but you've probably read or seen books by Stewart Sterling. That was his most used pseudonym when writing crime fiction paperbacks and pulp stories from the 1930s to the early 1960s. He was a prolific pulp writer, and he also had several series characters that we'll talk about today. It's a real shame that his name has been lost to the ages, because he produced over 500 radio mystery shows, and he wrote for both television and film. His pulp presence was nothing short of remarkable, as he penned nearly 400 detective stories. Mystery Files' Richard Moore deemed Stewart Sterling the, quote, king of the specialty detectives. This is a great feature, I promise you. I'm also going to review James Reasoner's sword-and-sorcery novel, Doom of the Dark Delta. But my first order of affairs concerns last week's content and the fallout from it. Last Monday, January 13th, I presented an interview I conducted with author Brian G. Barry. The reason this author came up on my radar was a connecting piece involving a horror movie from the 1980s, a film called Chopping Mall. Now, Barry was hired by Encyclopocalypse Publications to write a novelization of that movie. I received the book back in October, reviewed it on the blog, end of story, right? Wrong. I read a few days after my review that his book was pulled by the publisher and his contract was severed. I'm not one to get involved in all this modern stuff. As you know, I mostly live in the 20th century world of paperbacks. I chose not to read anything else about this decision. I didn't read anything the publisher said. I didn't read anything the author said. Instead, I just went to X. I messaged the author, and I didn't really know him from Adam, and asked him if he wanted to come on to the show to explain what happened. My guess is the publisher probably didn't want an interview. I never thought much of it after that, but Barry did get back to me, and after a few back and forths with schedules and times, he came on and I asked him what happened to make the publisher pull him. Again, up until he started talking, I had no idea what his response would even be. Here's a mic, tell us what happened, that's the end of it. He said that there were accusations of domestic abuse with a woman he was seeing. He claims that the abuse never happened and that it was a lie that cost him his publishing deal. I asked if there was any validity to the accusations. He said no. I asked if there was a police report. He said no. Since that interview, I've been inundated with comments. Some really enjoyed the interview and how it was coordinated and presented. Some liked my interview style, some didn't. But the question that recycles over and over is, why did I provide a platform for an abuser to speak? The comments are something to the effect of, Paperback Warrior supports violence against women. The Paperback Warrior supports Brian G. Barry. My responses to these questions and probes is always the same. I'm a neutral platform. Simple as that. I'm a neutral platform. Nowhere in that interview did you hear me support, partner, provide, encourage any allegiance to the author, the publisher, or the accuser. I did what any journalist does. Again, here's the hot mic. Tell us what happened in your words. You also never heard me say in that episode or any prior episode that I support violence against women. I have a wife. I have 2 teenage daughters. That goes against the grain. But the notion that the accused, or the accuser, should be kept silent and shouldn't have the opportunity to speak about the incident, that just doesn't sit right with me. In a cancel culture that's been out of control in the past, I don't believe silencing the accused and writing them off is the best approach to finding the truth. The exact same thing can be said of the accuser. As I record this, up until yesterday, I didn't even know the name of the accuser, so the condemnation that I didn't want to hear both sides is hyperbole. In my opinion, the best course of action is to have the accused speak, then organically await the accuser or any other related parties to hear the tape, so to speak, and then they can offer opinion on what's true and what isn't. That's the interview approach. If I were writing an article or a lengthy column, I'm hearing both sides of the story to prepare in my words what happened for the reader. Writing news stories puts the writer in the middle. This is an interview. It's not a news story. I'm not the middle person relaying messages. I'm letting the actual party articulate details to the listener without any censorship or outside influence. I reached out to the publisher, and they responded that they will review the interview. Good enough for me. I invited them to come on and talk about Barry, their books, their release schedule, or anything else that listeners may want to know about their company. I've posted numerous times since last week that I enjoy Barry's storytelling. I've read 2 of his books, I enjoyed both of them. But I also have posted that I really appreciate Encyclopocalypse and everything they do to support literature. Listen, they have a lot of authors, a lot of books, and I plan on continuing to read their publications. Since the interview, the accuser, her name is Danielle Yeager, she sent me a message. Again, I'm a neutral party. I have no one here to protect. I offered her the same opportunity that I offered Brian Barry. She's welcome to have a conversation with me. I can record it and I can present it right here on the show. She declined, and I totally respect that. She explained to me that Barry lied in the interview and that she was the victim of his attack on September 5th. She offered the emergency room report and a photo taken the day of her ER visit, which she says was on September the 10th. She states on her November the 11th, 2024 post on Facebook that she sustained a grade 1 concussion with grade 2 wrist sprain and class 1B tearing of TFCC ligaments. In regards to a police report, she states that she called Chelan City Sheriff's Office. I'm not sure if I'm saying that name right. Chelan is in Washington State. She called the sheriff's office to report the incident. She says that she was scheduled to fly out of Washington State on September the 9th. She states that the police advised her that if she wasn't going to be in the state for a month, which is how long it would take for the case to go to court, then they couldn't make a police report. Danielle said she lives in Canada. She couldn't stay in Washington that long and wait for the case to go to court, so there is no police report. Listen, no one knows what happened that night except the 2 people involved. I wasn't there. Listeners, you weren't there either. If what she says is true, then it's a truly horrific thing. I hope she finds happiness and that she finds someone that will care for her and treat her with human decency. I'm happy to know that there were no children involved in this. You've heard Barry explain his position. I've recounted to you what Danielle Yeager explained to me. You can come to your own conclusions. I'm not denouncing or defending anyone. I'm not here to influence anyone. The whole thing's a nightmare, and I hope both of them find some level of peace in the future. If you or anyone you know is suffering from domestic violence, you can call 1-800-799-7233 for help. All right, so with that being said, I am going to work right over here into the feature. I'm going to play us some mood music to get it set up, and I'll be right back. As I mentioned in my opener, today's feature is on an author that wrote hundreds of pulp stories from the 1930s until the early 1960s. He also created some distinct characters, some that were featured in his novels. That author is Prentice Winchell Jr., but you probably know him better as Stewart Sterling. Many scholars consider him to be the originator of the specialized detective, which we're going to talk about today. Many authors and stories feature a general private detective with no prior skill set in any particular area, but Sterling, he kind of changed that by creating heroes for his novels and pulps that specialized in store security, for example, or harbor patrol, or medical examination, or even horse racing investigations. Prentice Winchell was born in 1895 in Evanston, Illinois. He attended Dartmouth College, played football there, and graduated in 1916. He went to New York City in 1920, and he began a 14-year period of working as an editor on journals and trade publications. Now, as a side hustle, he began writing for the Pulps in 1925 and used the pseudonym of Stewart Sterling. The first character I wanted to bring up is Winchell's creation of Johnny Highgear. Now, this character debuted in the story Boomerang Dice in Black Mask April 1931 issue under Sterling's byline, but he spelled Sterling with an I instead of an E. The character would reappear in the June, July, September, and December issues of Black Mask in 1931, and then again the following year in the January, April, and May issues of that same magazine, all written under the Stewart Sterling name with an I. This is the only time that Sterling ever spelled his last name with an I. Thankfully, Steger Books has published every Johnny Highgear story in their collection titled Boomerang Dice, The Complete Black Mask Cases of Johnny Highgear by Stewart Sterling. That book has an introduction by Will Murray. Now, Johnny Highgear was an undercover police agent named K5 who battled gambling rackets during the Great Depression. This character sort of kickstarted the author's popularity. Again, this was the Johnny Highgear character. In 1938, Winchell used his Sterling pseudonym to create the Steve Kosky series. This character first appeared in the fall 1938 issue of Detective Book magazine in the story The Corpse Doctor. This story was reprinted in Bold Venture Press's Pulp Adventures number 18 in summer of 2015. You can still get that on Amazon, I believe. Kosky is an example of what this author really concentrated on, stories that featured alternatives to detectives and detective agencies. As we'll talk about in just a second, the author made Steve Kosky a New York Harbor patrol officer, which is unique in a way that it places the police officer somewhere other than just beating the streets or maybe raiding gambling houses or apartment complexes. Kosky's harbor investigations continued for 14 more short stories that appeared in Detective Book magazine up until 1942. Then he placed Steve Kosky in his own novel titled Down Among the Dead Men, published by Putnam in 1943. The character would then reappear again in Popular Detective for 3 stories between 1948 to 1950, then one more Kosky story in G-Men Detective in winter of 1951, before returning to Popular Detective for 2 more issues from 1951 and 1953. A second novel also appeared starring Steve Kosky in the 5 Detective Novels magazine in fall of 1953. Again, this is the Steve Kosky series, K-O-S-K-I. In 1939, there were 2 stories that appeared in Detective Tales that starred a character named Dab Jensen. However, I couldn't locate any information about the character, and those 2 issues aren't available anywhere online. Again, it's the Dab Jensen series. Also in 1939, the author created the character Vince Malley and inserted him into 3 stories for Black Mask, the May, July, and December issues. In the first story, Strictly for Suckers, Malley explains to readers that he works for a craps game guy that he refers to as the Louse. He explains that the Louse is actually a really good guy and keeps his nose clean. Obviously, the craps game he runs is illegal, so he constantly has to shuffle the business around to keep the police from finding him. The Louse pays Malley $100 per game to see that everybody gets away from the game with whatever they win. Malley says the Louse pays him because he's a practical guy who knows some of the angles and because he has a rep for not getting nervous when he smells powder burning. So he's sort of the leveler for these games, making sure everyone gets their money, there's no cheating, and if there is, he's a guy that gets it back even. So that's the scoop on this Vince Malley character that again appeared in 3 Black Mask issues in 1939. Again in 1939, Stewart Sterling's name appears in Dime Mystery Magazine with a story titled Coffins for the Living. This is the first appearance of a character named Rod Keeney. This character appears from 1939 through 1942 in the pages of Dime Mystery Magazine, Detective Tales, and Strange Detective Mysteries. This Rod Keeney character introduces himself in Coffins for the Living as Keeney, Shield number 9271, 15th Precinct, and his colleagues refer to him as a rookie. His beat is Chinatown, on and off of Pell Street. In this first story, Keeney's trying to find the terrorists behind planting bombs in victims' mouths. Wow. These bombs detonate, and then they decapitate the victims in a geyser of blood and brains. Now, Dime Mystery Magazine never held back much in terms of gore and violence, and this first story is a bloodbath. Later on, the series has Keeney listed as plainclothes, first-grade shield, 21st Precinct. So he sort of elevates. These stories, from what I can gather, focus on really bizarre criminal cases, like the aforementioned mouth bombs and others like people laughing themselves to death of all things. So again, this is the Rod Keeney series that ran from 1939 through 1942. Speaking of bizarre criminal cases, there was another character written by Sterling named Mal Varney. This character was in 4 issues of Strange Detective Mysteries from 1939 until 1940. While I don't have any information on this character, the story titles lead me to believe that these were truly outrageous narratives that would fit smoothly into Strange Detective Mysteries' wheelhouse. Examples being titles like Television's Torture Chamber and The Devil Dines on Corpses. Again, this is the Mal Varney series. Another character I don't have any information on is Keith Burnside. This character appeared in 3 issues of Dime Mystery Magazine from 1939 until 1940. The titles are outrageous as well, like The Corpse Who Wouldn't Die and Corpses on the Menu. Again, this is the Keith Burnside character. Another I don't have any information on is the Gary McGregor character that appeared in 2 issues of Dime Mystery Magazine in 1940 and 1941. If any of you listeners have any information on these characters, please let me know. I'm kind of curious what they're about. Keen Madden is another odd detective. He works for the West Coast Thoroughbred Racing Protective Bureau, basically investigating criminal cases within the horse racing and gambling industry. Now, West Coast doesn't mean California. It's actually West Coast, Florida. In fact, one of the stories takes place in Sarasota. This character appeared in 2 issues of Popular Detective, That was May of 1949 and June 1950. Again, this is the Keen Madden character. Another pulp character that Sterling wrote is the Don Marco series. Marco, Marko. This character appeared in 4 issues of Thrilling Detective between 1950 to 1953, and 1 issue of Popular Detective in May of 1953. Again, like so many of the author's characters, Don Marco is another abstract type of detective. Marco works in New York on Fifth Avenue on the 10th floor of a store called Nimblets. His frosted glass door proclaims Marco is chief of store protection. The first novelette to feature Marco has him on the case of who stole a delivery truck stuffed with the store's goods valued at $75,000. This also included some rare Russian furs. Again, this is the Don Marco series that ran 5 issues of Thrilling Detective. Another abstract type of character is Myro Caton, Caton. He appeared in Popular Detective in January 1953, and then a full-length novel in Triple Detective Spring 1953. Now, Caton is the medical examiner for the fictitious Navarro County, which I think honestly could be a play on Broward County, Florida, where Cape Canaveral is. A lot of the author's stories and novels take place in Florida, so that would certainly fit. Now, Myro Caton is described as sleeping in his socks and underwear with his trousers within reach of his bed. This is because he's always answering the phone late at night from a hospital. He smokes cigars, wears glasses, he's bald, and he drives an ancient Chevy, which I guess the word ancient in 1953 is pretty freaking old. In the novel The Ladies Out for Blood and Triple Detective, Caton is on the way to Samaritan Hospital because they have a new corpse. The narrator explains that it's written in statutes that every accidental shooting must be investigated by the medical examiner for possible evidence of homicide. This case has a 19-year-old woman who says she was putting a gun away and dropped it on the corner of her dressing table. It went off and shot her. But as Caton gets into the investigation, he learns there's a lot more to this than just an accidental shooting. Again, this is the Myro Caton series of 1 story and 1 novel from 1953. And that gets us up to the speed on the bulk of Sterling's writing career in the pulps. This last part of the feature is a look at his most popular characters and how they fit into novels. Let's start with Gil Vine. The first Gil Vine story appeared in Thrilling Detective in October 1939. It ran a total of 12 stories from 1939 until 1957 in Thrilling Detective, Dime Mystery Magazine, Popular Detective, Triple Detective, and so on. Also, the character appeared in 8 paperback novels from 1947 through 1960. Now, in the pulp magazines, Gil Vine leaves the FBI and 5 years later is shown as being a private eye on the streets running his own business. In some of those stories, Vine is just your average gumshoe. Those stories are in the third person. But by 1947's novel Dead Wrong, Vine is now the hotel security chief for a swanky New York hotel called Plaza Royale. And that's where the bulk of the series fixates. Vine's life and career working as a house dick, and these are presented in first-person fashion. The bulk of these novels and stories has Vine attempting to solve a crime before notifying the police. His first instinct is to always protect the hotel. You have to suspend your disbelief and kind of just go with it. Again, this is the Gil Vine series of stories and also the 8 novels. Sterling's Special Squad debuted in Black Mask August 1940 issue with the story 10 Carats of Lead. It was followed by 8 more stories that all appeared in Black Mask until 1943. This was really a revolutionary concept by Sterling to incorporate a team of criminal specialists that used inside techniques to solve crimes. This team is made up of the Loft Squad, the Bomb and Forgery Squad, the Criminal Identification Bureau, the Air Police, Pickpocket and Confidence Bureau, and the Stolen Property Bureau of the New York City Police Department. Each story in the Black Mask focuses on one of these special squad teams to solve crimes. The first story, 10 Carats of Lead, features Mike McCready of the Detective Bureau Lost Property Division investigating a diamond theft. Just to give you an idea how these stories work, again, this is the Special Squad series that ran in Black Mask from 1940 to 1943. For some reason, I was thinking they were in novels, but now I see that they were just stories. Using the pseudonym of Spencer Dean, the author created the character Don Cady, Cady is Cadee, and placed him in 9 novels, beginning with 1954's The Scent of Fear. Katie works for a department store, which I think is called Amblets, of course located in New York City. The books don't necessarily take place in New York, though, as Katie's assigned cases across the country because he serves as the store's chief of protection. For example, in Murder on Delivery, Katie is tracking down a missing $100,000 sable coat that was supposed to be delivered to Hollywood and is now missing. Again, this is the Don Katie series, and again, there were 9 novels, all written under the name Spencer Dean. The last major character I wanted to discuss is the one that most pulp fans remember when it comes to Sterling's prolific body of work. This is the Fire Marshal Ben Pedley series. The series ran from July 1939 through August of 1953. The bulk of the stories were in detective tales, but also in Mammoth Detective, Thrilling Detective, Popular Detective, Dime Detective, and so forth. There were 40 total stories, but then also 9 full-length novels, all of them in hardcover and paperback. Brian Ritt's Paperback Confidential quotes Art Scott describing the character as, quote, Ben Pedley is a humorless, hard-bitten, veteran smoke eater driven by an almost pathological hatred of arsonists, unquote. Sterling's Fire Marshal Ben Pedley series was acclaimed by Thomas Brophy, a real New York City fire marshal that was celebrated at the time. He described the series as being very true to the modern methods employed in the detection of arsonists. Besides Stewart Sterling and Spencer Dean, Prentice Winchell also used a few other names. As J. Day Becker, he wrote 2 sleaze books for Beacon, 1954's Gutter Gang and 1952's Keyhole Peeper, which is one of my favorite titles ever. Keyhole Peeper. Sounds creepy. He used the pseudonym Dexter St. Clair to write 2 Fawcett Gold Medal books, 1951's Saratoga Man Trap and 1963's The Lady's Not Living. In 1939, he used the house name Tom O'Neill to write a sports story in the Bullseye Sports Fall 1939 issue, which was later reprinted. He wrote at least one The Spider story as Grant Stockbridge. That was When Satan Came to Town in the December 1943 issue. He wrote 3 The Phantom Detective stories in fall of 1952 and the following year in the winter and spring issues. He wrote 3 stories of Dan Fowler G-Man that appeared in 1940, 41, and 1950. He wrote at least 2 of the Black Bat stories, which I believe occurred in 1953. His screenplay writing began in 1932. Now, he's credited with over 1,500 half-hour network shows with characters like Sherlock Holmes, Jimmy Valentine, and the heroes of Eno Crime Clues. He wrote the movie Having Wonderful Crime in 1945. He wrote an episode for the TV show The Web in 1950. I tried to narrow down a list somewhere of his radio show credits, but I just couldn't find enough information. Plus, I'm not even sure what name he used. I assume Sterling, but it could have been something totally different. On a personal side, the author moved to Daytona Beach, Florida in 1955. He was the skipper of his own houseboat. Later, he wrote a bridge column titled The Cardboard Jungle, and he often provided lectures on literature and poetry at women's clubs. In closing, according to Steger Books, they estimate that his stories have appeared in every pulp magazine title. Unfortunately, today you won't find his name beyond the first page on a Google search. He died in Tallahassee, Florida in 1976. As I mentioned earlier, Steger Books has the Johnny Highgear stories in a collection that you can purchase. Also, Armchair Fiction has reprinted his novel Dying Room Only as a double with Day Keen's Wake Up to Murder. Also, the aforementioned Pulp Adventures number 18 by Bold Venture Press, which features a Sterling story. Adventure House has a reprint of the G-Men detective issue from November 1941, which features the story The Eyes of Death by Stewart Sterling. The Gil Vine novel The Body in the Bed is available as a 99-cent ebook on Amazon. So you can still try this guy out and see if you like him. Looks like there's plenty of affordable ways to do that. My references for this feature was Brian Ritt's Paperback Confidential, MysteryFile.com, the Fiction Mag Index at Galactic Central, StegerBooks.com, and ThrillingDetective.com. My last portion of this episode is this week's book review. I chose a newer book by author James Reasoner. In case you live under a rock and don't know the Reasoner name, he's authored several Western series titles like Stagecoach Station, Long Arm, Trailsman, Wind River, as well as a ton of standalone novels. Reasoner is a real historian on pulp stories. He has an excellent blog, which I read regularly. Last year, he announced a new series he created titled Snake Haven. This series is a throwback to sword-and-sorcery pulp stories. As of this recording, there are 3 installments: Doom of the Dark Delta, Fear on the Fever Coast, and Lair of the Serpent Queen. These are $1 ebooks that weigh in at 100 pages, give or take a font size. I wanted to start at the beginning, so I chose Doom of the Dark Delta, the series debut. In the book, readers learn that series hero Horace Trevalle, I'm not sure if I'm saying that name right, it's Trevayle, Trevalle or Travel, is from the land of Albion. His father is Lord Amaril, and he has two brothers, both of which serve in a loyal and honorable way. Trevalle, being the brave-hearted, iron-fisted hero, served as a soldier. On a mission to quell an uprising, Trevalle was betrayed by a superior officer and sent back to his land in chains. Lord Amaril, apparently torn on the matter, buried Trevalle in work, which is where this novella begins. Trevalle began a journey down the Gulf of Metaxia to have a contract signed by a plantation owner specializing in giant snakes. These enormous serpents are called Loca Macumba. His ship was taken over by pirates, and Trevalle washes ashore on an island unknown to him. Immediately, a naked woman bursts from the swamp as warriors chase her. Trevalle, unarmed, joins the naked woman in running from these armed combatants. Later, he learns that this woman is actually the daughter of the plantation owner he was originally supposed to meet. Trevalle is then thrust into a battle with a ruler named Ostrazal, as well as the giant serpents, the savage troops, and even the woman's own allies. On this island, Trevalle has no alliances, no allegiance, and often he has no weapons. Outnumbered, he must fight to survive this grisly ordeal. Through chases, sword fights, prison escapes, the traditional damsel in distress rescue, Doom of the Dark Delta is a pulp-inspired sword and sorcery tale that's just brimming over with non-stop action. It's got a short page length, and Reasoner puts his skills to the test with really quick character development that matches the fast pace. I'm imagining this is just as fun for him as it is for me as the reader. Doom of the Dark Delta is just fantastic. Highly recommended for anyone that loves a great men's adventure. I can't say enough great things about it. It's wonderful. And that finishes out everything I had planned for this episode. I hope you enjoyed all of today's content. Please subscribe to the Paperback Warrior YouTube channel. You'll see videos about books, authors, publishers. You can also follow Paperback Warrior on Instagram, X, Facebook, Thread for multiple posts daily. Lord willing and the creek don't rise, I'll be back in 2 weeks with a brand new episode. Take care and enjoy whatever it is you're doing.